On June the 4th, when it was announced that Muhammad Ali had died, I think there was real shockwaves around the world, you know, not just amongst the sports fraternity, but actually when you look across to, you know, large sections of the world, in India, in Africa, whole swathes of the globe, actually people mourned Muhammad Ali. And, you know, it's not surprising that this guy was such a sporting icon. And ironically for me personally, when I heard that Ali had died, one of the first memories that came into my mind was actually memories of my family, of my two uncles who have both passed away actually. My Uncle Abraham, who died about 10 years ago, but actually also my Uncle Poppy was in hospital at the time, and he died about a week after Muhammad Ali had died. And if you'd indulge me, I'd like to dedicate this meeting to their memory and I'll tell you why. Because for me personally, and I think one of the best ways I can convey what Muhammad Ali meant to people was actually to take you back to my front room in the 1970s and actually tell you what he meant to black households, you know. I can remember in the 1970s, you know, I had watching Muhammad Ali, these fights, and being with my family, as I say, my Uncle Poppy, my Uncle Abe, my Uncle Ham, and my mum, you know, and being in our front room and watching what was then the latest, the first instalments of colour TVs, you know, but actually they were the size of a fridge, you know what I mean, big old colour TVs, and actually sitting around on a Saturday afternoon, they weren't being live like they are now. It was a rerun on World of Sport, and my uncles and that jumping for joy, singing Ali, 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 you know. It was like you were ringside yourself, and actually this conveyed such a feeling of pride, you know. And you had a situation where my Uncle Ham was actually became a political activist. He was a part of the movement. He, some of you might know Labour MP, who I'm proud to say has on the side of the Corbynistas just been appointed, Kate Assamore. Actually, my uncle went out with her mother for a while, and he became a political activist. Actually, my Uncle Poppy was more of what to the later years of his life, what you might call a working class Blairite. And my mum's a mad Pentecostal Christian, you know, who to this day is still really upset by the fact that Ali abandoned Christianity and became a Muslim. But in the context of watching him fight, you could see the tremendous pride that they had. And I remember sitting around as a child, listening to people talking about Ali. This is in a time when actually he was beginning to wane a bit, you know, he was getting a bit old, he was, you know, people were wondering, he'd won 2 world championships and people were thinking he wouldn't win a 3rd. But actually, I remember a tremendous sense of pride, and it was really brilliant. So as I say, for me, growing up, actually I can remember what an inspiration it was, and I can remember like it was yesterday, the day that I got up in my front room and I said to my uncles and my mum, actually I want to be an amateur boxer. And they said, why do you want to take up boxing? And I said to them, because I want to be the next Muhammad Ali. And that's something that, you know, obviously you're laughing because you know that didn't happen. But you know, as I say, he was an inspiration. And it's funny because even though Ali's my favourite sporting icon, those of you who know me will know that actually for years my Facebook photo has been a picture of Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X together, and he's been a personal hero of mine for a long time. But actually, as I became a boxer, he wasn't my favourite boxer. And I think the reason for that is actually a lot of fighters like boxers whose style they can replicate. And the thing is, actually, very few people could replicate Ali's style, you know what I mean? Trust me, I've been in the ring, and that floating like a butterfly, sting bite like a bee stuff is a lot harder than Ali made it look, sort of thing, you know? So, you know, we're here to talk about his political genius, but also you can't ignore that he was actually a really brilliant sporting genius as well. And I think to put his achievements in context, what I really want to do is just talk a little bit about boxing, the history of boxing in the United States, because actually boxing first came about in the United States under slavery. Slave owners used to put their biggest, toughest slaves in iron collars and used to watch them beat the crap out of each other, you know, and this was actually considered sport. But as boxing developed over time, it developed a sort of the sweet science, the noble art, the gentleman's sport, you know. There was a guy called John L. Sullivan, and actually it became a bit of a gentleman's sport. And the first black heavyweight that there was a guy called Jack Johnson, who was a heavyweight champion from 1908 to 1915. And actually Jack Johnson was absolutely hated by the white establishment. not only was this a black guy who got paid money for knocking out white guys, you know, in a time of deep racism, you know, he actually, Jack Johnson, had the heinous crime of having a white wife. And what they did was, the authorities, one day he was fighting in Canada and he brought his wife with him. They brought up a trumped up charge. There was a thing called the Mann Act about the transportation of white women for the purposes of prostitution. And this is what they did to him, and he had to go into exile. Moving forward a bit, actually, in the 1940s, there was also another black champion, a guy you must have heard of, a guy called Joe Louis, who was known as the Brown Bomber. Now, Louis became a sort of the epitome of a day of what you might call an acceptable Negro. He was someone who actually fought, and he fought against a German guy called Maximilian twice. So Maximilian was actually Hitler's champion. He was someone who Hitler thought was going to show the Aryan race to all their pride, and actually to Joe Louis's credit, he knocked him out twice, you know, and the US authorities for that reason tolerated him, but at the same time they still didn't want him to be an uppity Negro. And Joe Louis himself says, "Oh, I don't do much talking. I leave that to my manager." He was the epitome of a quiet Negro sort of thing. So there you have it. And actually what happened with Louis was a sort of, at the time of the 1940s, he also epitomised this changing situation for black people in America. You saw a situation where many black people had actually gone to fight in the Second World War, a war which was supposed to be about democracy against tyranny. You know, many black people, you know, at the turn of the 20th century, most black people lived in the rural South. Many of them had moved to the North because of war, first World War, Second World War, started working in industrial centres and stuff. And there was a bit of progress, but at the same time there was still deep racism entrenched in the South through Jim Crow, but also in the North as well, in de facto stuff. And this is the world that Muhammad Ali was born into. He was born in 1942. He was born in 1942. He was born in a place called Louisville, Kentucky. His father was a frustrated artist. His father was actually an artist, but because of racism, couldn't get any work as an artist, so he had to get a work as a painter and decorator. His mum was a domestic service. Then actually the name classicist Marcellus Clay is actually his dad's name, and his dad passed it on to him. And actually, despite the fact that he rejected it, it also had a radical meaning. He was Marcellus Clay, the original Marcellus Clay, was an abolitionist, and a Republican abolitionist who agitated against slavery. So even in his early days, you know, he had a bit of a radical legacy. And Ali first comes to prominence in 1960 when he wins the light heavyweight gold medal in Rome. And at that time, he was very proud, as you would be. He was very, very proud to have won it. And I can't remember the poem. He makes up some poem. I beat a Russian, I beat a Pole, I came home with the US gold. You know, he comes out and he says all this stuff. But when he returns to the US, he actually returns to a world of, you know, racism and segregation. And actually, very quickly, this challenges his ideas. He tells this brilliant story, and people get a chance to see it on Parkinson, the interview on Parkinson. He says, yeah, I had my gold medal around my neck, and he was walking down the street and he wanted to go to a restaurant, and he says he turns up at this restaurant and he thought he's an Olympic champion now, they're going to serve me, I'm going to do this, and he gets to the door and a woman says to him, "I'm sorry sir, we don't serve Negroes." And he says, "Well, that's okay because I don't eat them." And you know, he says, you know, how angry this makes him, you know, how angry this makes him. And he says from that point on, he decided to become a Muslim. Now that's a little bit of a shortcut actually, because what happened with Ali was, like a lot of black people at that time in the early 1960s, they've seen the civil rights movement in the South, you know, and the civil rights movement had been the time where they were asking for you know, moderate reforms, but that didn't quite cut it with him. And he starts seeing the Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam are a sort of a religious, what we call religious sect, which basically believed that the white people were the results of a genetic experiment by a guy called Dr. Yaqub, and really that the whites were going to rule the world for a period of 6,000 years, and that period was coming to an end, and that the only way that black people could save themselves was withdrawing from white society. So this was quite a radical, you know, quite a sectarian message, but quite a radical message at the time, you know. So Ali becomes influenced by this, and then what happens in 1964, after winning lots of fights after he turned professional, he comes up to fight for the World Championship against a guy called Sonny Liston. Now, for those of you who don't know that follow boxing, Sonny Liston was an absolute brute of a man. He was a big, big guy. He had been a prison convict for murder. He was someone who the mafia had employed to smash up union strikes and stuff. He used to go around breaking in legs and arms. So he was a really sort of quite a formidable guy. And at the time, the US press wanted to cast a fight as Ali, the clean-cut Olympian, versus this big brute. But what happened is that when rumours became about that Muhammad Ali was flirting with the Nation of Islam, you know, this hated and despised sect, actually the fight changes and people decide that they actually want to see Muhammad Ali get a beating. And because Liston was such a brute, they thought this was going to happen, right? So Ali, come to fight, Ali comes, you know, ain't got time to go for round, but Ali boxes absolutely brilliant, knocks out Liston, you know, and there's such a shock in the world. And actually what happens is, he then announces that he wanted to become a member of the Nation of Islam, and the whole of the white establishment, the whole of the media turned against him. But it's not just the white establishment, actually civil rights leaders. There's a guy called Ray Wilkins who was head of an organisation called the National Advancement for Coloured People. That's an association for the advancement for coloured people, the NAWCCP. And he sort of denounces Ali, you know, and a lot of people, you know, both on the establishment side, but actually people in the civil rights movement are worried about Ali's stance. But despite that, this act of defiance sends a real shiver through the civil rights movement. And I'm going to read you a little quote that what a female activist said at the time. She says, "I remember when Ali joined the nation," right, she said, right, "the act of joining was not something that many of us particularly liked. But the notion that he would do it, that he jumped out there, joined this group that was so despised by mainstream America, and to be proud of it, sent a little thrill for you. He was able to tell white folks, for us, to go to hell. I'm doing it, and I'm doing it my way." And that's what really said, you know, Ali said. So people thought, you know, despite the fact that they didn't like the fact that he joined the Nation of Islam, they were really, you know, sent a thrill. He stuck up two fingers to the establishment, right? And after he won the title, Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam, decides to change his name. First, he was known for a little while as Cassius X, but he decides to change his name to Muhammad Ali. And what happens in America, you can gauge someone's sort of views about the Vietnam War, about racism, the civil rights movement, by what they call Muhammad Ali. The people who were progressive called him Ali. The people who were not progressive still wanted to call him by his, you know, by his own name, Cassius K. And he fought one of his first unification fights with a guy called Ernie Terrell. Terrell, right throughout another big, black, huge, formidable looking guy, you know what I mean? You think to yourself, when you see these guys, you think to yourself, oh my God, they're scary, you know? And you see Ali beat him, you think, wow, what a champion. But this Terrell guy, all the way through the build-up at the fight, this, you know, calls him Clay. White establishment, the reporters, they love it. Yeah, can you tell me any faults in your opponent? Yeah, I'm going to teach that Clay a lesson. He's disrespectful, blah, 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 right? And you can see that actually it becomes a sort of, the whole of this sort of political establishment want Ali to get a beating. And Ali, in his sort of inimitable style, goes, you know, I predict when at the sound of the bell, Terrell's going to catch hell. And he boxes Terrell. And what's really funny is that if you watch the fight, well, I don't know if it's funny, but when you watch the fight, you see Ali, and he's in the ring, and every time Terrell comes, you know, the round's about to end, he lands a punch, and you see Terrell wobbling, and he steps away from him, and he says, "What's my name, fool? What's my name, fool?" And he says, you know, "You're disrespecting me, you're disrespecting my religion, how dare you," know? And he actually strung out the fight. He could have knocked out Terrell 2 or 3 rounds, but he makes him go a long distance. And at the time, the press think that this is something that he's doing to be sadistic, but actually far from it. Actually, Ali, if you watch his career, actually he's quite merciful for some of his fights. You see when he fought Henry Cooper, and Henry Cooper in the second fight had blood gushing out of his eye. Actually, he decides, I don't want to hurt Cooper. And after the fight, he says, you know, Henry Cooper's got a family, he's got children, he's a decent man. I don't want to hurt him. You know, so Ali was not a brutal fighter, but actually what he wants to do is people who disrespected him, people who played the game of sucking up to the political establishment, Ali wanted to teach them a lesson, you know. So already he's becoming a pole of, you know, of attraction to the civil rights movement. Despite the Nation of Islam, actually not because of the Nation of Islam, despite the Nation of Islam, and maybe we'll go into that a bit later. But you know, he becomes a pole of attraction. Then seismic thing happens. You know, this is the beginning of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War. There's very little anti-war movement. There's nothing really happening. What happens is they decide to draft him, and Ali knows that actually, if he had joined the army, he would have just been an exhibition boxer. He wouldn't have been sent to the front line. It would have just have been a sort of, you know, just a sort of like a figurehead sort of thing. But he says no. He says no, and this is what he says. He says, like, what? Why should they ask me to put on a uniform to go 10,000 miles from home to drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while the so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs and denied simple human rights, you know? And the rest, it's quite a long quote, but he goes on in the rest of the quote to say, well, actually, you know, he's not going to fight you know, he's not going to fight and imprison people who are fighting for their own liberation. He's not going to fight, you know, and he says, actually, I stand a lot to lose, but actually, I don't stand a lot to lose because I'm standing up for my beliefs, you know, and he stands up for his beliefs. And I say, this is really, really important because there's not much of an anti-war, not much of an anti-war movement going on at the time, you know. And it's important that in terms of his boxing career, the authorities, what they do is they say, well, because he's not going to war, we're gonna deny him being the champ, and they strip him of his title, you know, and they take away his means of earning a living. And it's quite funny because 10 minutes. And they say to him, you know, they strip his title and they deprive him of a means of earning a living. And what Ali really does, you know, is actually, it's great. He becomes an anti-war champion, you know, and he actually spurs the movement. In the time that he was banned, he goes round, you know, he runs out of money because they've just not denied his living, but he goes round to different colleges, he speaks at something like 600 universities, goes round whipping up anti-war sentiment, and actually the anti-war movement become proud of him, and he becomes a real figurehead. And it's funny because people might have heard of a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There was an activist called Stokely Carmichael, and this is what Carmichael had to say about Ali. He said, of all the people who opposed the war in Vietnam, I think Muhammad Ali risked the most. Lots of people refused to go. Some went to jail, but no one risked as much from their decision not to go to war in Vietnam as Muhammad Ali. And his greatness can be seen in the fact that despite all of what had done to him, he became greater and more humane. And that's right, actually, after the war, after that, he became great. Now, I've not got time, I've only got 10 minutes left, right? So, basically, there's a series, when he's stripped of the title, there's a guy called, people might have heard of Smoking Joe Fraser. There's elimination bouts, and Fraser becomes the champion in his absence. And there's a petition to reinstate Ali, right? And Ali gradually fights Fraser in the first fight, brutal 15-man fight. Actually, Ali loses that first fight. And after that first fight, people say, you know, you watch it and it's like, fair brutal, and people think, well, actually, maybe both of these guys should retire because, you know, it's taken so much out of them. Ali wins the rematch, but he's still not champion. I'm going to skip through a few of his fights. But what's really, really important is his anti-war, his anti-war stance inspires other people. I mean, we know about the great Martin Luther King, but actually, Ali came out against the war before him. And if anyone inspired anyone, it was Muhammad Ali who inspired Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King said this when he came out against the war. He said, as Muhammad Ali has said, we are all victims of the same system of oppression. Now think about that, comrades, think about that. He's identifying a system of oppression. We are all victims. This is an anti-imperialist stance, internationalist stance taken by Muhammad Ali, which is then taken up by Martin Luther King, you know. And Ali and King become, again, despite, you know, in the face of opposition from the Nation of Islam, Ali and King become friends. And Ali not only campaigns against the war, but he campaigns against injustice, poverty. You know, I'm involved in a housing campaign at the moment, you know, against the Housing Act. And actually, Ali, to his credit, went on lots of marches and went on lots of protests against rotten conditions and housing. And this is what he said in one of the protests he went on. He said, he went to Louisville, his original town. He went there. He said, "In your struggle for freedom, I am with you. I came to Louisville because I could not remain silent when my people, many of whom I grew up with, went to school with, and some of whom are my blood relatives, are being beaten, stomped and kicked in the streets simply because they want freedom, justice and equality in housing." You know, and we can see that Ali comes out against poverty, he comes out against war. This is someone who comes out against racism. This is someone who, you know, could have just sat down and taken the money and run, but actually someone who puts it all on the line to stand up and fight for justice, to fight against racism. And you can see the effect that he has in the movement. You know, people have seen the Mexico '68 posters where you see John Carlos and Tommy Smith with a Black Power salute. You know, people think that this was just some sort of spontaneous, you know, protest. No, not at all. Actually, before the Olympic Games, there was an organisation set up by black athletes called the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And actually, you see them making a conscious stand to fight back against it, you know. And you see the Black Power salute. Actually, the other guy, the white guy in that picture, Peter Norman, he also goes on to be an activist in Australia against the treatment of Aborigines and stuff, you know. And you know, it's a really similar environment. All of that wouldn't have taken place if it wasn't for the stance that Muhammad Ali took. Now, by contrast to the Tommy Smith and John Carlos, there's a guy called George Foreman. People might have known, they see him now, he's big old grill beer, you know, George Foreman, everything. Actually, at the time, George Foreman, he won the heavyweight gold. And when he won the gold, he drapes himself in a US flag, you know, while everyone else was doing Black Power salutes, Foreman was waving flags and whatever. And Foreman went on to be quite a brutal champion. I talked about Smoking Joe Fraser. Actually, when Foreman boxed Fraser, he knocked him down 6 times in one round. He makes him look like a kid. He's like, boom, boom, boom. Just see, you should see the pictures. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna. Right, and there's like this little Foreman's, you know. Anyway, right. But you know, so when Ali goes to fight him in a fight that now becomes famous, the Rumble in the Jumble. And I haven't got time. I apologise, I haven't got time to really go into it. But he fights him in a country called Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And Ali, you know, he instantly becomes a hero to the local people. The fight gets postponed because Foreman gets a cut over his eye, and they have to stay in Zaire for 6 weeks. Now, Foreman had immediately got the backs of the local people up, because when he turned up at the airport, he turned up with his Pet Station dog. Now, for those of you who know about your colonial history, we know that when the Belgians ruled the Congo, actually one of the things they used to do was have Alsatian dogs and set them onto the local population. So Foreman becomes identified with the old colonial system. By contrast, Ali becomes identified with his new spirit of resistance, which is taking the world, a spirit of anti-colonialism, a spirit of fighting back. And if you see, there's a brilliant film, you know, called, you know, there's a brilliant film When We Were Kings, and there's also the Rumble in the Jumble. You see the local people going, Ali Mumbaye, Ali Mumbaye, which means Ali kill him, and you know it becomes a worldwide star. You know, so I think it's important to see his global appeal against the against the backdrop of people fighting back against racism, fighting back against colonialism, fighting back against war, and it becomes a brilliant thing. And I think that the most important thing to remember about Ali as well is that he was an absolute internationalism. You know, in 1969, the Nation of Islam had actually disowned Ali because of his radical stuff, and he went on to then go to become a global ambassador against oppression. In '64, he visited Ghana. I mean, he spoke to people in the liberation struggles there. You know, in 1974 he went to Palestine. He actually went to a refugee camp in Palestine and spoke out against Palestine, you know, against the oppression of Palestine by Israel, and he said that he supported Palestinian people. You know, he also went to places like India and stuff like that, and said that he stood side by side with Indians and people like that. You know. Becomes a brilliant champion, you know, and he's, you know, as I say, someone who we should remember for, you know, fighting. I haven't got time to go into stuff, but if people here remember when some of the stuff when Ali comes to Britain, it's really important that we talk about that. Now, sadly, age comes to us all, and Ali was no exception. In 1984, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and it becomes, you know, I haven't got much time to go into it now, but it becomes, you know, a pale shadow of his former self, you know, and you can see that he's on decline. And some of the political establishment who had previously hated him, you know, hated what he stood for, hated the resistance, you know, began to sort of like seek him out to sort of get acceptance for themselves. And this is also a time when actually the political mood had changed. If we had, you know, when Ali was at the height of his powers in the 1960s and the early 70s, we had the rise of the Black Power movement. Actually, by the time, you know, after 74, you begin to see a sort of change in the political landscape where the Black Power movement becomes co-opted, and actually, you know, Richard Nixon gets up and famously says, oh, if you want black power, if you mean you want black economic empowerment, black businesses, you know, a certain layer of black middle class people become co-opted and become part of the system. You see more black politicians, black mayors, police chiefs and so on. You begin to see that. So at a time when Ali was physically in decline, you also see that the movement had started to wane anyway, you know. And as I say, in the 80s, people like Reagan, in the 90s, people like Clinton, and began to sort of associate themselves with Ali, you know. And in 1996, people might remember in Atlanta Games, actually the Atlanta Games were disgusting because the police went around clearing homeless people off the street. They went around with it was like the 1950s all over again, with police dogs, you know, clearing out the town, driving the poor, making sure that actually America presented a nice modern face to the world, a face which hid poverty, which hid segregation and racism. And, you know, what they did was they ruled out Muhammad Ali, and people might remember him shaking, lighting the Olympic flame at the games, you know. And that's quite a sad picture to see in your mind's eye when you think about Muhammad Ali. But for us, I think as revolutionaries, we need to look back and take the positives. Look back at Ali at the fight of his fame. Look back at the Muhammad Ali who stood up against racism, the Muhammad Ali who stood up against war, the Muhammad Ali who actually went round the globe talking about fighting racism, talking about uniting people, spoke out against poverty, you know. Actually, Muhammad Ali came to Britain. Britain was one of the only countries that didn't, when he got stripped of the title, actually Ali, the British Border Control, and trust me, I'll box the British Border Boxing Control, sort of quite a reactionary board, you know, old white men in suits and stuff like that. But they said, we're not going to de-recognise Ali as champion because actually he hasn't been beaten in the ring. And that's something that Ali always remembered. And actually Ali came to Britain time and time again. And there's people, a friend of mine told the story about when he came to Brixton in the 80s and how the reception he received there. And I think people remember the Ali that stood up, the Ali that was a tremendous fighter. And I think for us, we have to say that we look to the politics of Muhammad Ali because he was a great inspiration. And I think it's really important today that we are having a meeting at Marxism about Muhammad Ali, not just to celebrate his life. You know, we want to celebrate his life and we want to say, yeah, you're a great hero, you're a hero of our movement. But we look for the things that Ali fought for. Actually, a lot of them still haven't been achieved. We look in America now, we see the Black Lives Matter movement. We see Eric Garner strangled by the police. We see, you know, people being shot down. We see poverty, we see racism, you know. And I say that we need to continue fighting that. And I'm sure there's some people in the audience who probably read more about Ali than I have, and I want you to come and speak. But also, if you're engaged in anti-racist struggles now, you need to come and speak, because actually that is the sort of legacy that Ali wants. The legacy of people fighting back. And I think it's really important to say that when you look at the you look back at the influence he had. The Black Panther Party, when they formed in 1966, when they had their slogan, the Black Panther, underneath it they said, "We are the greatest." That's a direct quote from Ali. You know, "We are the greatest." And I think us in the anti-racist movement, in the anti-war movements, we must say we are the greatest, and we're the greatest because actually we have inspiration from people like Muhammad Ali.
You're right. My name's Kieran. I'm from Tottenham. I used to box, and I could talk about Muhammad Ali all day. But I think the three things that I need to say are: A, I'm from Tottenham. My boxing gym is on Tottenham High Road, where it burnt down, and I'm very proud to say that the boxing gym itself didn't burn down. I mean, people fought back when someone was killed by the police, and that I'm very proud of. My community fought back. Also, the West Indies cricket team, Leicester City and the Rope-a-Dope. Leicester City were 5,000 to 1 to win the Premier League last year. As a Tottenham fan, I'm ashamed that we came third in a 2-horse race, but we did. Because they organised, they were a team, they worked bloody hard, and they were a team, they worked together and they managed to grind out the results in the end. Secondly, the West Indies cricket team were in the 70s, under Viv Richards, I think, and were a big athletic black team, playing essentially the white man's sport. They were playing cricket and they smacked everyone. Like they did the Muhammad Ali thing with cricket, and it's just a very inspiring story. There's a BBC 4 programme on them if you are able to watch it. Also, I like to finish on saying, if you're organised, you're disciplined, you've got that fire in your belly like Ali had, like many fighters over the years have had, and you work together, because boxing isn't just an individual sport. You have people in the corner, you have people training you, you have people you look up to, and you have the person you're fighting. We can win anything, basically. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Yes. I'm short. I just wanted to say something personal really about Muhammad Ali. I was born in a very small northern working class white town called St Helens. Used to be Lancashire, it's now Merseyside. And we didn't see no black people where I came from. There wasn't any black people in towns like that. If you've got a train to Liverpool, you might occasionally see a ticket collector or one of the Lime Street station staff who was black, but there was no black people. I didn't come from a particularly political working class family. My dad was a member of the local miners' club and the local Labour Party club, but then so was every working class man back in that day, I suppose. And then on my TV screen, this fella arrived, and he was, whenever Muhammad Ali was on the telly, it was silence in my house. Everybody was watching that telly. It was extraordinary as a young white working class child to see a character like this. And then, the political nature of him. I mean, if I have any political principles now, it's because of Muhammad Ali. Because he came into working people's lives in this country and in America and around the globe, as Dean pointed out. And he gave us a sense of the ability to say no and to fight back and to show that actually, whether you're black or you're white, it is working class interests that are at the root of things. And I think it's a shame in a little way. I mean, it's wonderful that we're here having this meeting at Marxism. I feel a little bit sad in some ways because I think that, because he was a boxer, in a sense, he wasn't taken as seriously as a black political activist as some of the other American activists like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or whatever. And I think it's wonderful that that people today and we today are claiming actually his wonderful history as a working class fighter. And I personally have a great debt of gratitude for Muhammad Ali for making me the principled woman that I am.
Yeah, comrades, I used to watch boxing. I used to enjoy watching boxing, and I have to confess, the very first fight I ever saw and enjoyed was the famous Rumble in the Jungle, when Ali fought and beat George Foreman. And I loved Ali then, and I love him today. And we loved him then for precisely the reasons that Dean's outlined, because at a time when we were unseen, excluded, in every way, he was someone who was loud and proud, he was athletic, he was handsome, he was everything that we wanted to be. I love him today, not because of boxing, and we shouldn't glorify boxing. There's talk of the noble art and all the self-discipline and so on. I'm sure much of that is true. I've never boxed, but remember what it does to people, and it is about working class men and increasingly women these days being paraded, usually for the delight and pleasure of rich, posh people. And of course, when Ali fought, the last humiliating fights against Larry Holmes and Trevor Burbage, it was already the case that he was suffering the effects of the Parkinson's syndrome that ultimately had some role in his death. I love him for the reasons that Dean outlined, because he was an activist for human rights and dignity, and it is so important today that we reclaim him for those reasons. Because think about today, 2016, if somebody converted to Islam, changed their name and denounced the imperialist wars and racism of their government, how would they be treated? What would they be considered? Think about the Olympics that is just going to come in Rio in a couple of months' time, and no doubt the opening ceremony will include a warm tribute to Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest, most celebrated members of the Olympic family. Yeah, and then we'll have this pledge by the athletes to compete in the true spirit of sportsmanship. We'll find out later how many of them, have competed through having to take performance-enhancing drugs and so on. But thereafter, it will be an orgy of nationalism, won't it? An orgy of nationalism, where the successful athletes, the first thing that will happen will be that they'll be draped in their national flag before they take their lap of honour. Compare that with 1968 and what those Olympians, the Black Power salute did, inspired, as Dean rightly says, by Muhammad Ali. We want to reclaim him, and I just want to finish by quoting what Barack Obama said, because Obama wasn't at Ali's funeral. He couldn't attend, but he sent a message. I thought I had it up, so I can't find it, but I'll have to paraphrase it. He basically said he was a guy who was stripped of his title, he was stripped of his living, he very nearly lost everything. So Obama recognises that Ali suffered because of the principled stance that he took. But he then went on to say, but he still chose America, because he knew that only here in America could he get it all back. Ali was America, Ali still is America. In other words, Ali's journey, Ali's struggle is presented as the ultimate example of the American dream, isn't it? Here in America you can achieve everything. Actually, the America of today is the America in which, despite 2 terms of a black president, there has had to be a Black Lives Matter movement established, where racism and poverty and division continues to blight the lives of black and white people. Ali fought quite rightly against that, and it's for precise those reasons, not particularly his boxing ability, but for those reasons we should fight to reclaim him.
So pull it down. Put it down. Very good. Yeah, there was many adults which suffered racism. I was brought up in the 50s and 60s, and children used to get racism in the schools. For example, I was the only black child in my school, because I lived outside London, and the teachers would point you out. And I was told when I was 7 years old I was pointed out to the class, said, oh, Della's subnormal because she was coloured. Let's call you coloured in them days. And I was forever, so I became a little activist at school. So and it's very common for other children to call you like the N-word and worse. So I had to, the only thing I knew how to fight back was to physically fight them. So there I was in the playground. I'm short now, imagine when I was little, I was even real short thing. And I'd be fighting, literally punching people, fighting them in the playground. And not only my age group, I'd be fighting the older ones as well. So I got a bit of a reputation as, you know what, but that's the only thing I could think of to succeed. And it did succeed in a way, because they knew, don't call me a name, because I will come after you. Then, and also, when I used to go around to, because it wasn't really the children got it from their parents. So, for example, I went round to a friend of mine when I was 8 years old, and then she stopped. I remember the day I walked up to her house, she stopped and told me to wait outside. I thought it was strange. So she went in, and then she came out, her face was bright red, and I heard her mother shouting, I don't know N-word in here. No effing N-word in here. So it was the children as well which suffered, and we had no one to back us up. So the struggle starts really from when you're a child. So and I remember Muhammad Ali, even though I was a woman, we used to like watching Muhammad Ali and watch his fights. Because any other thing on TV was, don't know who heard of it, maybe the older ones will, love your neighbour. Love thy neighbour. And it's the most cringe-worthy programme. But there's only 2 channels on the TV. So it was a horrible experience that's the only thing they portrayed black people. It was very derogatory. So then the best thing on TV next was Muhammad Ali. And they gave us a positive role model and someone to look up to. Yeah, and that's it.
Hi, my name is Aisha and I just want to talk a wee bit about 2 points. First one is we had a massive protest against Donald Trump in Scotland not that long ago. Trump's somebody who's a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, and he wants to build a wall to keep out Mexicans, and he wants to stop Muslims from coming into the USA. And he was out here the day after the referendum, spouting his stuff to stir up hatred and division. And I think like that demonstration that we had, there was 150 people there on out in the middle of nowhere in Scotland in the countryside and where his golf course is, and I think the spirit of that demonstration and the anti-racism is what Muhammad Ali stood for, challenging people like Trump and the establishment that feed racist ideas, that propagate them and divide people, and the type of people who are our enemies rather than friends, and we're opposed to them. Another thing I wanted to say was when Muhammad Ali was alive, he was influenced by national liberation movements in Africa, and he was influenced by people like Malcolm X, who he had a friendship with, and people like Patrice Lumumba, who was killed in the Congo by the UN and the United States Secret Services. So he was fighting the system, and he was fighting for equality and justice for people right around the world, and that was his internationalism.
Two early experiences that I had with Muhammad Ali, not personally obviously, but in my early days, 14 I was when he fought Sonny Liston, and the first thing I did, I opened a book. I don't mean book for reading, but for betting, and I was offering 15-2 to his scummers. I don't know how I would have paid, if Ali hadn't have won. Fortunately, he did, and I was able to rip some money in. I must admit, 25 quid. Now, 25 quid back in 1964 were a fucking shed load of money, let me tell you. But the other experience, it did inspire me to box, you know. And I had three bouts, and I got battered to the bloody canvas every bloody time. I did learn after that, however, you know. So, you know, it's a question of experience as well, isn't it? You know. I've got a question though. Well, one of the best books about Ali is Redemption Song by Matt Marcuse. Is it being republished that now?
No, it's at the back. He's going to plug it later.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'd rather to recommend that book to anyone. It's a fantastic read. Plus, the question is, what happened to him with the Nation of Islam? How did he move out, and where, why did that happen, and all the rest of it? I understand. Did he become a Sufi Muslim after that? Sunni. Oh, the mainstream Sunni. Right. Okay. So that's the question.
So Dean will come back to any questions after the discussion.
I want to say that the impact of Muhammad Ali at my particular time was profound. It was profound in two ways. One, it was a question of somebody who got up and fought back. And do you mean I agree that boxing is a brutal sport. But it now comes in handy when you're fighting the Nazis and the racists. And there's nothing more satisfying than putting a combination on somebody who doesn't expect it at that particular time in the 1970s, because what it inspired you to be able to do was the whole question that you had self-defense was no offense. You had the right to defend yourself. It's not enough as a method, but it's a method that I think that, but Muhammad Ali used to argue something. He used to say, don't stink, think. Right? That's what I remember him saying it on Parkinson. When he had to go at Parkinson, I was so glad he had to go at Parkinson for being a smarmy git on our televisions. But the reason why it's important is because he became a Sunni Muslim because the Nation of Islam only represented part of the liberation movements at that particular time. It was shaped by the fact that the Communist Party, part of Ali coming out, was breaking that whole stranglehold of the Communist Party being destroyed and the rebuilding of a left that could articulate itself, but articulate itself in a kind of third world type of politics. So I think that what I mean by that in terms of identifying the oppressed as being able to fight back, it was the first shattering of those questions. It opened up the whole debate about what's going to happen in the 20th century. A man called W. Du Bois said the real question of the 20th century was the question of the colour line and how it's going to be passed. And I think what we face now is the question of open institutional racism has been challenged in a certain way, but the bar has now been lifted onto the question of class. And nothing convinces me more than what's been happening over the last couple of days. To be honest, Stand Up to Racism has been inundated with the level of racist attacks on people that is shocking in that, because some racists have got their head up. But they've got their head up because the same crisis that came in the 1970s and 1980s they haven't been able to solve means there's also a solution. I think there's a solution for it. In the 60s, there was a backlash against unity of black and white people during the civil rights movement. I think there's more, the question of austerity is pulling people more and more together. And the question of looking at the world, there's nothing better than you saw all these racists and Islamophobes having to say they praised Muhammad Ali. They praised somebody who had the name Muhammad, do you mean, and saying that he was it begins to help us fight on the question of how we fight today. I want to thank Dean for his meeting, because the past and the present are linked together about how we fight for the future. It's not in the ring that will defeat the ruling class. It will be in the ring of real struggle that begins to come forward, and the ideas of Muhammad Ali represents that spirit of resistance.
Hi, my name is Janneke. I just came in from Holland, so I was a little bit late. So I missed part of your speech, and therefore I'm posing a question, but maybe you have already answered my question. Well, in Holland we have, of course, a movement going on against Zwarte Piet, the Black Pete, the Santa Claus stereotype, the racist character, which has been over here in Holland since the abolition of slavery. So we have a stronger, the movement is getting stronger, but it's still pretty small. And on the other hand, we also have very racist police who are shooting innocent black people. So we have, in certain ways, we do have the situation that is in the States. We have it in Holland as well. Police covering up their shameless choking of Mitch Henriquez about a year ago. A Reuben man who went to a music festival and for fun reasons for police was choked to death. And a couple of weeks ago, Mitchell Winters was shot by the police, and it's all being covered up. So we do have a very small movement going on, starting in Holland, but we have two basic discussions going on. One is on white privilege and the other is on black nationalism, which of course are quite interlinked. Actually, I haven't read much about Muhammad Ali, so I was really curious to know what we can learn from his struggle in the thing that we as international socialists always say, black and white unite. What can we take from his struggle? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to make that point, isn't it, about how people were inspired by Muhammad Ali as an activist, in the same way they were inspired by Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King. But also, I do think, the first point I'll make around that is actually I don't think we can underestimate, the effect of having what he labelled himself as a cocky black person getting on a national TV in the absolute disgusting racist circumstances of the US. And I don't think we should underestimate actually the positivity and actually, the power that people felt when young black people who have been faced with that amount of racism, especially in the southern states. But also I think there's a dialectical nature to it, because we as Marxists, we argue that actually being determines consciousness. And I think in some ways you can actually make that argument, can't you, that Muhammad Ali completely reflected the politicisation of the 1960s in the US. I mean, it's not a coincidence that, he fought the anti-racist fight while the Alabama bus boycott was going on, or Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. And I think, we have to be completely clear about that, because actually, Muhammad Ali wasn't a messiah sent from us to bring about these things. Actually, he completely reflected the brilliant struggles against racism that were going on in the US. But I really wanted to take up the point around the legacy of Muhammad Ali, because I mean, if you see the reports and the mainstream news and the way that they're reporting him, it's all about how flashy he looked or how well he boxed. And actually, it's interesting, when activists like Muhammad Ali die, that's when the system starts to celebrate them, isn't it? It isn't when they're alive. And I think there's an interesting point that a comrade made about the Black Lives Matter movement. And if you think about the funeral of Muhammad Ali, you could see that politicisation really coming through, with the odd exception of bloody Bill Clinton being on the platform around it. But there was a brilliant interview, and I don't know if people saw it, but it was with a Black Lives Matter activist who was at the funeral, and the interviewer was saying, what did Muhammad Ali mean to you? What did he mean to you? What did he bring to your life? And the guy held up his fist. And then the interviewer was like, oh right, his fist because of boxing, etc. And he said, no, this is a black fist. He taught me pride and he taught me power, and that's the legacy of Muhammad Ali.
This is the second time I come up, sorry. I'm not very good at speaking. But just on the Dutch lady's point about white privilege and racism, there was a really important figure who I had wanted to talk about called Fred Hampton, who he was a Black Panther who linked up black and white struggles. He went to the Appalachian Mountains during while he was still alive in the 60s, I think, and basically went to the back and beyond to like some redneck communities. Sorry, that's very, very backward white communities. Argued that white people and black people had the same interests if they were from the same class. And there's a really inspiring point where this big old cowboy-looking fella stands up and he says, "Well, if this guy's with me, then I'm with him." sort of thing. And like, I think the question of white privilege is really important, and whether black and white people can fight together to change the system, or we're diametrically opposed as black and white people.
Yes, as someone who grew up, in the 1970s, which was a period which is very different to today. I mean, you got to remember that there was open racism was much more common. Growing up as a black kid in the 70s, there was much more playground racism, and so to have someone like Muhammad Ali, to appear, was a hugely important figure in the fight against racism in Britain. He was someone that all black people identified with, whether you came from the Caribbean, or whether you were Muslim, or whether you were Asian. You saw this militant, defiant black man who was not going to be a winner on the terms of the establishment, but on his own terms as a black Muslim. And that was he did more to actually fight racism, I think, than all the initiatives of the government, in terms of actually helping to build a grassroots movement and actually changing the ideas of black people and of white people about black people. So I think it's very important. I think the thing which, to me, the most beautiful thing I've seen is a YouTube video he did. He was being interviewed on Irish TV, black and white image, and he's asked to give a poem, and it's about the Ithaca prison riot, and it's actually the most beautiful poem I've ever heard anyone give, and I think you should really watch that. This is amazing. It's about total defiance. It's about the anger and the resistance. And if you can find it on YouTube, you should watch it.
Any final contributions or questions? Yeah. Yay.
Thanks. Just to continue on from that point, I mean, the key point, I think, for Muhammad Ali is that he said, "I'm not going to be, what you want me to be." I'm sorry, I missed the start of the talk, so I missed a lot of things. But there was boxing at that time, was very much defined by managers and racism in America. You either a bad Negro, Jack Johnson, figures like that who completely went and did their own. Did their own thing, and were completely punished. Unforgiven blackness, as Du Bois said about Johnson. Completely forgotten, even though he's being very prominent as first black heavyweight in the US. His name echoed around kind of colonial Africa and so on. Or you were supposedly the good Negro, Joe Louis, Floyd Patterson, people later like that. And although these were much more complicated figures in their own right, Joe Louis, people like that, anti-racism, still, involved in sports civil rights movement, much more complicated figures. And Joe Louis' famous battles against Schmeling in the 30s, or against Primo Carnero, I think, representing Italian fascism or whatever. So even though the people Schmeling and Carnero weren't fascists themselves and actually opposed fascism to some extent. They were symbolic. It was about symbolic representation. You're a black person on this world stage, symbolic thing. And then, Ali comes along, and he's really, the mafia is important as well, and linked to boxing as well. And the way that Muhammad Ali, through Nation of Islam, was able to escape the grip of the mafia on boxing in America. That gave him another alternative kind of support network there, and able to do it. But then, crucially, his radicalisation, he turned, and that. This is where the point about America comes in, because Marchese's book, brilliant, called Redemption Song. In some way, in some ways there is a kind of element of redemption to it, in the sense that he's someone who he did it, as people said, on his own terms, against kind of American racism, against the American empire and so on. But in the end, he won the hearts of ordinary Americans, eventually, despite being that other America, not official America, on one level. And that sense there is a redemption there to it. But the problem is, when the American elite incorporate that into trying to, for American nationalism, when Ali, as people have talked about, Pan-Africanist, much more internationalist vision about it. And it's just very, it's very interesting. I'm sure you've probably made this comparison, but my case he draws this interesting comparison with Paul Robeson. The final point, someone who one time was loved by America in their early career to some extent, but then completely for their principles over whether Islam, Nation of Islam with Muhammad Ali, or communism in the case of Robeson, got absolutely hammered by the American ruling class. And yet, Robeson dies kind of forgotten figure in many ways, still quite forgotten in some ways after being a kind of celebrity at one point. Ali gets incorporated. I just think Ali's legacy is incredible. We've got a meeting in Leeds, just final point, which is on Muhammad Ali. I just went into a kind of West Indian food place, just left some post up instantly. People all around it go, meeting with Muhammad Ali. Brian came to a meeting in Chapeltown, this is Chapeltown in Leeds. Huge, instantly, that instant connection among the black community with Muhammad Ali, instant identification, and he's, a real, as I say, fighter against racism, fighter against war.
So I'm going to bring Dean back to sum up for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, comrades, very good discussion, and I'm really, really happy. And again, I'll say, I know there's a meeting about Black called Jeremy, but I'm all glad to see you here, right? The first speaker, the first contribution, actually, for those of you who missed it, I told the meeting that actually I wanted to dedicate this meeting to a couple of my uncles, who the last of whom passed away really recently, my uncle Poppy. And it's funny, you talked about cricket in the 70s, and actually my other abiding memory of growing up is cricket in the 70s. I absolutely hate cricket, but I'll tell you, look, Jay wants to shoot me now, but I'll tell you something, I can never forget the pride the West Indian cricket team took. And I think when we talk about, this is the meeting, I think there's another meeting, book here called Capitalism and Sport, and it's worth reading it because actually, I'm someone who's really, really interested in sport. I boxed, I like mountain biking, my son's a really good footballer, I spend a lot of my time being a football dad, shifting him around, running the line and all of that stuff. So I'm really into sport, but actually, as socialists, I think we need to have an idea about what sport's about, because sport is not some neutral body. It's a fun thing to do, it keeps you fit and whatever. But it's quite interesting. You should also read this book called The People's History of Sports in the United States by this guy, Dave Zarvin, because basically sports always tries to play a political role, And it's when Ali was growing up, and when Ali came into fame, actually at a time where there was a culture, where there was an anti-war movement, when there was an anti-racism movement, the US authorities try to use sport as a counterbalance to that sort of movement, and present clean athletes. And they start taken by Ali and taken by the black athletes in the 1960s, particularly in Mexico, was actually a brilliant refrain on that. And I think for me growing up, when I grew up in the I'm not that old, but I grew up when I was moved to Hoxton, a place called Hoxton in East London in 1979. It was a time when the National Front were really rife, and actually I remember them selling their paper bulldog. I remember being spat out with my sister and all of that stuff, and it was a really horrible atmosphere. And for people like Ali and the West Indies cricket team to actually show a positive image, actually it gave black people pride, And actually, when we took, taking the white man on, cricket was invented by England. But these big, strong, black athletic guys, whoosh, bang, out. It was a brilliant thing, and I always remember that. And so it's a good moment. So actually, there's times when sport can act as a beacon of rebellion, and it's really important to remember that. I think Molly's point is actually about St Helens. Actually, you should. There's a program. You should go away and look and see as much footage of Ali as possible. I took this meeting on a short notice, and I would have loved to have done some images and stuff, because actually you've got to see some of the stuff. There's 4 years ago when Ali was 70, there was a program which was made to commemorate his 70th birthday, and it was a program called When Ali Came to Britain, and it's absolutely brilliant. If you can go and get this program, you should watch it, because actually what's really important is that actually it shows you the relationship he had with Britain. When his title was taken away from him, there was a sort of guy from a Traveller family, a guy called Paddy Moynihan, who was a bare knuckle fighter. He went round and gathered 22,000 petitions, right? Now, for you young people in the audience, this is the time before change.org. This is the time before you could just click and sign a petition on your phone. This is the time when you had to just go around physically getting those numbers. And it's funny because actually Ali came to Britain and he went. And he personally went to thank this guy, Paddy Moynihan, for his support. And there's footage of this Ali and this guy. Every time he came to Britain, he went to this northern town, saw this guy, you know, used to like play with his kids, do this, and he did this as a mark of celebration. And you should see him actually. Anyone in there from Newcastle? Ali loved your town. Ali came up to Newcastle, said it was a brilliant example of fighting back against racism. Went to Birmingham when Ali got married. His third wife. He actually got a blessing in a Birmingham mosque, and he came back to Britain time and time again because he said that actually he loved Britain because of the anti-racist stance he had taken, you know. And he actually came back and he saw, you know, people asked about why he broke with the Nation of Islam, and I think Wayman explained it, but actually it's quite important to know that he broke away for some of the same reasons that Malcolm X broke away. Malcolm X, there was a guy called, I don't know if you've heard of him, there's a guy called Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was a famous a black baseball player, one of the first baseball players who, you know, was fated by the US and stuff like that. And Malcolm X is quite scathing about him. He's quite scathing because he says, you know, he's a white man's champion. Not like Ali. Ali's a fine athlete. Ali stands up, he sticks, he's not like Robinson. Robinson panders to the establishment and he's asking for integration. Muhammad Ali's going to fight for, as a black man. But then Robinson came out and said something to Ali, which said something to Malcolm X, which actually shamed him. He said, you know, it's all very well being brave and being militant up north. Why don't you come down south and take part in the civil rights movement down south? And actually Malcolm X said that he was frustrated that the Nation of Islam refrained from getting involved in day-to-day struggles of black people, you know. And Ali was the same type of person. Ali, Elijah Muhammad, and the Nation of Islam wanted Ali to be some sort of passive figurehead who they could just wheel out, you know. But Ali wasn't like that. Ali wanted to fight back. He wanted to get involved in the day-to-day struggles. As I said to you earlier, he went on marches, he went on anti-war rallies, he did stuff and he was part of the movement, you know, despite the Nation of Islam, not because of it, you know. And actually, that's why the break came, because actually the Nation of Islam was a very narrow, inward-looking sect. And Ali was someone who actually had a global appeal and wanted to fight back on a global nature. As I said, Yannicka, you missed some of the meeting, but actually, what's really important about Ali is that actually, as I said before, Ali is someone who took up oppression, not the suppression of black people. He went to Palestine, think about this, in 1974 and said, I stand with the Palestinians. This is something that is really, really, really important, you know. You know, Ali was someone who actually went around the world. He was inspired by national liberation struggles. And he also went and said, you are my brothers, you know. And actually, Ali was someone who, when he converted to become a Sunni Muslim, actually embraced black and white together. He actually believed that people should fight back. Now, I want to come back to the thing about boxing being a cool sport, because actually I've got to admit I love boxing still to this day. Obviously, I boxed for 13 years. I wasn't like that guy who got knocked down 3 times. I was quite useful. But it's a good contribution, Coleman. But it's funny because actually I saw an interview with Parkinson the other day, and you should go away and watch all this stuff on YouTube. I saw this interview in Parkinson the other day, and Ali's talking about boxing. He said, you know what? I don't really like boxing that much. He goes, when I think about it, he goes, it's poor black people beating up on themselves to watch rich white people in the audience and stuff. And he said, and then he goes on to say about why he took it easy on Henry Cooper and why he took it easy on other fighters and stuff, because he thought, I don't want to ruin these people for the sake of the rich people in the crowd. And it's funny because I'll tell you about my 2 last fights actually, my 2 last bouts. Actually, I boxed in a place called Gillingham in Kent. Right? I boxed for the Rotary Club. Right? What happens when you box? When I first started boxing as an amateur boxer, I used to box in the local St Monica's Church Hall, and you're boxing and stuff, and your mates would come and watch you box, and it'd be like great, and it'd be like, you know, all the local people come and watch you. As you get better and better, you start to get what's called dinner shows, right? these are dinner shows. These are in hotels. What they normally format is there's normally a dinner where the local rich will come and there's a little bit of charity attached to it. And then what happens is that, you know, afterwards there's a bit of boxing and then there's normally a couple of strippers at the end, you know, and this is what this is like. And I remember I was boxing in Gillingham, and as I went out to the crowd, there was a group of white guys in tuxedos and stuff, and I was boxing a white guy, and they were shouting, "Do the black bastard, do the black," and I was like, fucking hell, I was really, really angry that these racists are shouting and all this stuff, right? And then afterwards, I took my anger out of my opponent, and I stopped him in the second round. And I remember as I walked past the table, some guy said, "Well done, mate. I just want 20 quid on you." And I felt really dirty and quite cheap, you know. And it's you know, I do like boxing, but actually that whole thing about sport, about like a bit like gladiators in the Roman Empire, there was a really horrible thing about it. And I think actually Ali put it, he used the sport as a vehicle to further stuff, you know. I just want to quickly come back on a point about white privilege, because, you know, the first time I heard that term used was at a Trayvon Martin, well, not the first time, but the first time I heard someone get up and say it at a protest, within a protest a few years back when Trayvon Martin, we were protesting outside the US Embassy because of Trayvon Martin. And what people don't know what white privilege is there's this presumed notion that different groups have different sets of privilege, which give you a bit of a hierarchy in society, you know, and that actually white people, because they don't suffer from racism, you know, inadvertently, you know, benefit from it. And we have to say, actually, as socialists, the fact that you walk down the street and you don't get beat up as a white person doesn't mean that you are benefiting from racism. Actually, when you look in America, yes, black people are disproportionately put in prison and locked up and being killed, but actually poor white Americans are also suffering at the hands of the system as well, you know. And we have to say that actually Lenin talks about Marxists as being the tribunes of the oppressed. We need to take on every aspect of that oppression. But that doesn't mean that we fetishize one hierarchy against another. For us, the root cause of oppression is capitalism. And actually the root cause of racism, hopefully there's other meetings that Marxism will go into more depth. But actually, racism grew up as a system of capitalism. And I think for us, when we celebrate Muhammad Ali's life, you know, we have to take the positives. And as I say, you know, Muhammad Ali was someone who was an uncompromising, you know, fighter. The woman who got up and talked about us being coloured, actually Muhammad Ali broke that, you know. When people, I remember when people used the term coloured, Muhammad Ali was someone who got up and said, "I'm so pretty," and that wasn't just about him boasting. He was saying, "I'm black and proud," and that made black people feel that actually, no, we can stand up, we are black and proud, and we can fight, you know. And I think it's really, really, really important that we look at his legacy as something positive. And as Wayman said, I like that phrase. In the ring of the world struggle, we're going to go the distance. We're going to make sure that we'll do the alley shuffle, and we're going to make sure that we float like a butterfly and we sting like a bee, because we need to fight. You know, we need to fight oppression. And there'll be some people in there. If you're not members of the party already, if you're not members of the Socialist Workers Party, there's going to be a lot of meetings you're going to go to at Marxism where they're all going to end up and say, join the fight and join us. And actually, this is no exception, because even though it's a meeting about Muhammad Ali, you know, if you join the Socialist Workers Party, you're not going to become the next Muhammad Ali. I haven't become the next Muhammad Ali. But what you will do, you will take part in a struggle, and you will be honouring his legacy by fighting back against oppression, against racism, against imperialism and war. And that's why we need you in our organisation, so we can all fight that together and in the ring of real struggle, go the distance. Cheers.